any of our listeners experiencing or who may experience intense grief? I know you don't want to be like the grief person, but I just feel like you're too valuable to have here and us like not dive into this. Because like I know for me personally, my mom, well, I lost my dad when I was 16. So my mom was
Yeah.
widowed at when I was 16. And so
Mm-hmm.
the grief was really intense and she made a lot of poor financial decisions while in grief. And I don't want that for anybody else. And so as someone who's trained in this and has experienced this, like how can somebody who's experiencing intense grief like be pursuing holistic wealth? What should they pick up? What should they lay down? Like what would your advice be for them?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And thank you for bringing that forward, Jen, because at the Institute on Holistic Wealth, we're actually releasing our Trauma of Money course today. And it's a certification called the Certified Trauma of Money Consultant. And you know how you mentioned your mom being widowed, um, when you were younger and making bad financial decisions. Well, that's one of the effects of trauma. And it's unbelievable what can happen to the brain during trauma that allows us to make these decisions. I mean, there's cognitive bias, there's cognitive overload. The risk taking can go either way. It can swing to being extreme, or it can cause paralysis with money. I've heard widows talk about money as blood money, as something that is just horrible and something that they can't even begin to wrap their minds around. So that's a very important point and something that is so important for people to realize. And so in terms of, being in this intense period of grief and looking to craft a life of holistic wealth, there's so many lessons laid out in the book, but I would speak about one or two that are very important in the weeks and months after you suffer a loss, when you feel so overloaded, right? And you feel overwhelmed and you're not sure what to do. And I know in the moments after, for me, I had to take a step back. I had to take a step back to exercise self-care and to take care of my mental health. And in doing that, I had to establish boundaries. And, I talk about, saying no in the book, and there's an entire chapter on that. Well, that is actually one of the ways that we can fill our holistic wealth bank accounts, with saying no. And the word no is used in this sense to fill your stores of energy. Saying no in this sense is used to fill your stores, shore up your emotional health, shore up your mental health, and to shore up that spiritual day-to-day practice that you need to get over it in the first couple of weeks and months, when you need that time to meditate and to think about how you're going to craft a life forward. And Jen, you mentioned the case of your mom, and I know that's the case of a lot of widows where, you don't take that time to think about these things. You keep going, trying to kind of, set it to the back of your mind. And then sometimes you can make the wrong decisions. And so in saying no and establishing boundaries, that's one of the ways that we can, craft that time to kind of just think about and to get over and to heal and to think about what we want going forward. The other thing is outlining, and this isn't something to do in the first week or month after, but at some point, I know many people going through a loss think about, wow, how do I, in terms of this legacy, how do I honor my loved one's legacy? And that's something that comes about pretty quickly when you go through something like this. And so I always tell my consultants, start writing down, or women I coach, start writing down a mission for yourself, start writing down your personal mission, what you want it to look like. And then within that mission, of course, part of that is a legacy, and your legacy, and combined with the legacy of your loved one. So that also helps to kind of put things in perspective, to kind of give you that personal GPS going forward, the direction of your life. You know, we talked about intentional life design, and I always say holistic wealth is intentional by design. It's unbelievable the intentional steps that I had to take. Like everything had to be intentional and methodical. Which phone calls to take in the first week? You know, someone had to be screening my phone calls. I mean, it's that you know, involved, right? And so, you know, when I talk about the holistic wealth method, where you think of things that are additions and depletions to your holistic wealth bank account, we're talking about things like this, where it's time and boundaries and relationships around you that enrich you and things like that. Of course, in the first few months of grief, those relationships are key. Those loved ones around you who, you know, support you and in ways that you can't even imagine, you know, and really lift you up. So that's a critical part of it in terms of first steps and trying to think through, especially when you're in a you know, a position of deep grief, or you're in that mode and moment where it's so overwhelming.
I appreciate the kind approach that you're advocating for, and yeah, how much of this speaks to you having walked through it and now being able to walk others through navigating financial decisions and holistic wealth, whether going through grief or not. But I think anytime there's an acute transition, tragic loss, grief of any sort, there can a lot of times be guilt and shame attached to that. It's almost like I counsel a lot of people going through grief and transition, and there's always some component of feeling as though I'm not doing this right. And I know I'm not doing this right, but I don't totally know how to make all of these massive decisions. And like you said, I can highlight it's that reservoir of the holistic that hopefully is present. And if not, that's what we can be aiming for, of who do I have around me? Who's trustworthy? Who's in my court that I can be leaning on and receiving from? And how can I be kind to myself in the midst of that? I think it's okay to say, I made some really awful decisions in like the week, month following this tragedy, but not staying there. And how can I move towards the things that are going to be life-giving, beneficial for me, for my family? But I can just affirm with what you've said, Keisha, that those first couple of weeks following a tragic grief and loss, I don't think we can expect too much from ourselves. We don't exactly know how it's going to hit us or how we're going to navigate it. But my goodness, where there's community, that's the reservoir I think we can tap into. Overall,
Absolutely.
kindness.
Mhm.